on the June 2025 What's Neat.
We continue on with layout construction as I'm rebuilding and changing this layout, and this month we finish up the woodwork.
The What's Neat show is sponsored by Lombard Hobbies, your value hobby shop for over 40 years of modelers helping modelers. Big inventory, value pricing, fast shipping, and great service.
And by Broadway Limited Imports, the cutting-edge leader in model trains. Check out their website at broadway-limited.com. And by Bachman Trains. Now that's the way to run a railroad. Check out their website at bachmantrains.com.
And thank you for helping us support the best hobby in the world.
This is What's Neat for June 2025. I'm your host, Ken Patterson, and this month we've got a good show. We continue on with layout construction as I'm rebuilding and changing this layout. And this month we finish up the woodwork just prior to next month when we will start laying track, which is going to be a blessing because I can't wait to see some trains run. I want to share with you also some beautiful models from Broadway Limited that I've just received this week. These are NW2 locomotives and SW7s in N scale. Just absolutely beautiful little models. The models that I've got here all have Paragon 4 sound in them. And I'm going to get that N scale layout that's up in the garage out because I really want to see these little babies run. They're just absolutely beautiful. You can check them out at the Broadway Limited website, broadwaylimitedimports.com. Also this month, we are going to weather a steam locomotive. I'm going to show how to weather this Baltimore and Ohio. This beautiful little 462 locomotive. She's black, fresh out of the box. This is a DCC ready model, so I'll be running it with just a regular throttle power pack, an MRC power pack. And I've got to be able to do that when we actually weather the wheels on it. A very important factor is when you weather a steam engine, you've got to be able to make it run. So look forward to that segment also this month on What's Neat. And so with that, I want to say, be sure to please watch the What's Neat This Week video podcast that we record down here every Saturday night, keeping you updated on what's new in the hobby with special guests, a lot of presentations, sometimes a how-to, a lot of information on this and what's going on weekly in this, the best hobby in the world, the hobby of model railroading. So with that, let's continue on with the rest of this June 2025 What's Neat. For this segment of What's Neat, we are going to weather a steam locomotive. I've got this beautiful little Bachman 462 locomotive here. This is a Baltimore and Ohio locomotive. And this is DCC ready. So we're going to make that look not box fresh, but used. Now I've got the model sitting on this rotating like a lazy Suzanne. And the reason I do that is because when we're weathering a model like this, we want to be able to connect it to power in a power pack so that we can make the wheels spin when we're going to apply the dust and the sand weathering that you would see on a prototype locomotive like this. Now it's really easy to make a lazy Suzanne for yourself if you don't have a fancy one like this. I mean, this one that I built will do HO scale, it'll do O scale, and G scale by simply removing the various layers on this. You can simply get and I've got one over here, let me show it to you. I've got some pictures that I did where I weathered a Bachmann steam locomotive back in 2001. And this was, I'm going to show you these pictures, this was the very first ad that ever ran of Bachmann products where the models were completely weathered. And so I'm using a stereo speaker and a 4x4, and I'm using one of these rotating lazy Suzannes underneath that, so I can just simply spin the locomotive around in front of the spray booth. And you don't need to have a spray booth for a project like this. You can actually do this in your garage, or you can do it outside if it's not too windy. Another thing that we're going to do, and I'm going to take the camera off of this so I can explain the rest of this segment, so just bear with me as I do a quick edit. Okay, that's better. So what I'm going to do is the first step in the process of weathering something is you go to your books, and I've got some prototype books here. In fact, I've got some New York Central books here. I'm going to pull out my B&O books and weather according to color pictures. If you can find color photographs, it allows you to see the sand color, the variation between Santa Fe out in the west and New York Central or Baltimore and Ohio locomotives would be the color of the ballast and or the color of the sand that they would use for adding traction to the rails. That is what would dictate the type of color that you would mix up for your light spray that you would find on the main drivers and below the wheels around the tender, where all that sand dust builds up on the bottom of the locomotive. And so the prototype pictures help dictate that. Also, you've got the soot, you've got the valve gear grease, all the various elements. Let me show you a shot I did for the 2002 WHATS catalog cover. This was an Allegheny locomotive, and they asked me to weather it as per prototype photographs, and I did that exactly. I mean, I nailed it. It's easy when you got a picture because all the answers are there. Using an airbrush, using the oil paints, all of that, I weathered this model to the point where it looks so realistic that they actually sent me another model, little known fact. And then I re-weathered the other model that did appear on the catalog cover for 2002 using military weathering techniques, where you're just dry brushing white paint onto the rivets and onto the details and things like that to highlight the details. So rather than making the locomotive look absolutely prototypically accurate in the photograph to the point where it almost would look like a real photograph, they thought it looked too real. It didn't really replicate the model the way they wanted to, so this is how it looked after the model received the light dry brushing to make it look, highlight the details on it. And it came out to be a very beautiful photograph. But we are going to go full process on this, starting with the oil paint wash using this tile right here. I'm going to use burnt umber. I'm going to use some straight paint brushes to pull down the oil paints, the wash, and I use turpenoid. Not turpentine. I used to use turpentine in the past, but it has a tendency to make numbers come off, paint come off, and or soften up the plastic too much. You're also going to want to use an airbrush for airbrushing the dust. Here I've got an Iowata airbrush with a big bottle on it. I like a double action airbrush, not a single action. You want to be able to control the amount of paint, not just the airflow, but the amount of paint that comes out. And a double action airbrush enables us to do that. We want to control the paint. We want to make it go exactly where we want it to go so the model looks just perfect. So with that, I'm going to walk you through the basic process now. It's going to be very simple. We're going to start out with the oil paint wash. And this is the hardest thing to get over now as you see me do this to this model. I mean, you just bought a brand new beautiful model and you're going to slap this gross looking stuff all over it. And yes, we are. I put a light wash on the locomotive like you see me doing here right now, and the tender. And the reason for that is that creates atmosphere. That creates the grime and the grit that just seems to settle on everything. You don't think so? Go look inside your garage. It gets on everything. It's the pollen. It depends on what time of the year it is, but everything's gross. And that's what this oil paint does. After that dries, I then put it onto the lazy Suzanne in front of the spray booth. And here you can see me applying with an airbrush a mixture of paint, very thinned. I'm thinning it with lacquer thinner because the evaporation rate is very quick for that. And I've got the driver spinning as I spray the locomotive. And then disconnect the wires, of course, I could just spin it right around and do the other side of the locomotive. But again, the drivers have got to be moving so that you don't get any shadows from the side rods on the wheels. I mean, it just ruins it, because now as a train where you got shadows, it looks ridiculous. It does, it looks silly. So you want an even coat of this sand, is what we're representing, is sand and some of the grit that would come up from the ballast, but primarily this comes from the sanding mechanisms underneath the steam locomotive for traction. So with that done, I set it aside. Now I can take an airbrush and spray some soot on top. I like to do that on top, especially if I got a silver boiler. It helps darken up that area. And then the final process to doing this is, I like to go over the locomotive with a wash of simple turpenoid. Just the brush has got some turpenoid on it, and what it does is it draws down the dust that we just put on the drivers and on the side rods and on the bottom of the tender. It draws it down to create the rain wash effect of the weathering being washed down by rain. Now after that, there have been times where I'll go back and just put a very light dusting of weathering onto the drivers again as a follow-up after I did the rain wash pull down, but it's really not necessary. The last step is, and I like to do this with straight black oil paint and a small fine brush. You don't have to have the model moving for this part. And you just take that black, shiny oil paint and you put it around all the gears, all the valve gears. That's where the guys are lubricating these engines. That part of the engine's dark all the time. The sand may have gotten on it, but they've oiled it and lubricated this part. It's got a lot of goo on it. So that's what the black does. It's a very effective, small little subtle detail that really comes out well on the model. And so with that, after doing all of that and letting things dry, I can show you the model now running on the layout here with a DC power pack. It just looks wonderful. It looks dirty. It looks used. And this weathering could be done on any type of a steam locomotive, taking into consideration the color of the ballast in the area and or the color of the sand they may have used, depending upon the geography in the country and or the world if you're doing international weathering. The process is basically the same because the grit, the soot, the rain, the wash effect, it's always the same. And so that's this locomotive weathering quick segment for What's Neat. For this segment of What's Neat, we're going to continue on with layout construction as I work on the woodwork and everything over the washer, dryer, and sink area that eventually will connect to that beautiful foam module that you've seen me build that is yet unfinished. In the last video last month, I did say that I wasn't sure what type of turnouts that I wanted to use on this. I was looking at the potential of using Peco, the new WHATS turnouts, some old Shinnahara turnouts that I have had, and I will tell you, I have a decision here that I want to report. I was cleaning out underneath the back porch, and I found a diorama. This used to be a 4-foot by 8-foot diorama right here. And let me show you the beautiful find that I didn't expect, which is really going to help with this layout construction segment. This was a Shinnahara track diorama. It was a 4x8 scene of turnouts modeled after the pattern of St. Louis Union Station, one of the legs of the Y coming out of the train station. So it was a relatively complicated track pattern that I matched from photographs. There's a lot of double slip switches in this. There's a total of 19 turnouts in this, even a 3-way right here. I've cut the diorama up. Thank you, I actually glued this one together with white glue. This diorama has got to be from somewhere around 2005, because I've been going through the old WHATS catalogs, and this was the ad shot, or the presentation that they had made for years in the catalog, showing off that diorama. So what I'm going to do is take those 19 turnouts that are in it and whether they're soldered or not. Some are, some aren't. It's all Shinnahara track. It's all code 83, which is what I want to use, and it'll match up to my microengineering track that I've already got. So in a future episode of What's Neat, I'm going to take this whole thing apart, utilize the turnouts that I need, the number 10s and number 8s, and it's going to be off to the races for laying track and having this layout running. As you watch this video, we're very close to the RPM meet that's coming up here in St. Louis. I've got to have this layout running by midsummer for that show. So with that, now we'll continue on with the rest of this What's Neat segment, layout construction, part 2, part 3, I'm not sure, but it is a lot of fun just to sit there and watch as things go together just beautifully. And so with that, we'll continue on with this segment of What's Neat. Turning my attention back to the area over this sink and table here, what I've done was after cleaning off the aluminum stud of the old piece of plywood that was on top and scraping it down, cleaning it, making it smooth, I've put the stud back into place on the existing brackets. And as you can see, I've pushed it out about 2 inches from the wall. It's never been that far from the wall in the past, but it's going to work for the about 9-inch piece of wood that I've got on top. And I've cut 2 pieces of plywood, the total length of 11 feet, and I've got the stud centered really to the plywood, and I'm going to make an exact measurement on that. So what I think I'm going to do on this, these trains don't weigh a lot. I know the metal stud is not going to warp, but this has the potential for these outside cantilevered edges here to potentially warp, okay? So I may hot melt glue or attach some sort of plywood 1/4-inch bracing underneath all the way down, something that would look aesthetically nice. I'm not sure yet what to do on that. The main thing is now to get probably some Gorilla Glue, the polyurethane glue that I mix with water. Spray the whole board, make everything wet, plywood and metal base. Let it glue, let it set up and cure. And put some weights on top of it right here in this spot. That'll ensure that everything, when it's cured and it's hardened, will be exactly the same position that it is on the wall. At that point, I'm going to have to come back and rebuild this approach piece of plywood onto the diorama. This has never been nailed down, it's always just sat here. But it's going to be as simple as cutting another piece of wood so that I've got 9 inches wide on that outside, and then bringing the track work, curving it into it. So because this was an up and down level in the back for 2 different tracks, changing levels, I'm going to have to rebuild that piece of wood there so that it's perfectly level and everything matches up to the plywood. And we're almost there. It'll be easy to shim that out and make it perfect during final screwing and assembly of everything. So at this point, it's just a woodworking project. We're nowhere near laying track yet. Still have to cut the corner piece, as this new top for this whole section now has been glued together, weighted down, and been curing for 2 days. Just gonna go over this and carve it smooth, make it level, put the track on top, put the blocks in it, wrap it in oak, and make it beautiful again. So onward and upward, let's continue on with this woodworking project here, get this to the point where we can lay tracks all the way through this section and start working on the curve. Two options for glue on this project. I'm simply attaching plywood to metal. We know liquid nails worked because it held up for 15 years. I've got this Great Stuff Pro Series stuff. I like this. It does expand. And it does take about 9 hours, about 4 hours to 9 hours to set up and cure based on the temperatures down here in the basement. Right now it's about 68 degrees down here. I think I'm going to opt to use the Gorilla Glue. It sets up quick. It'll set up in 30 minutes. It will expand, but I'm going to put weights on this. I've measured it all the way down using a square to the metal stud, so it's centered, it's dead centered on each side with about 2.5 inches hanging over each side of the metal. So what we're going to do is just pull this sheet off, wet the wood, and wet the metal stud. Now the glue is activated with water, so it's got to be wet to work. And you don't need a lot. I'm going to put 2 beads up and down this whole thing. So 16 feet of glue here, 2 beads. And it will expand and fill any gaps, but we're not going to allow any gaps by putting weight on top of this. Even weight. So maybe an 8-foot level with some steel blocks on it. It seems crazy making things wet, but when this cures and dries, then we'll start staining and making the wood look beautiful. There's a bit of a bow in this wall, I'm not sure why. It's about 1/2 inch, actually just a little under a 1/2 inch bow in the wall itself. So that's why I'm using this square to make sure that my measurements are still the same throughout. And that's it. I need to get weights on this right away and let it cure. And just like that, I've got weights on top of 2 levels here, a 4-foot and an 8-foot level. And everything is straight and just setting up. Nothing's screwed into place. It's just sitting here on its own balance. And I just want to make sure everything's just perfect as things are setting up here. So I'm going to keep working on this. Just make sure it's just right. Okay, so 12 bar clamps and probably 35 or 40 pounds of various steel weights are holding this down into place now. I've got some levels on there just to even the weight of the steel blocks that are on top of this. It's holding the weight quite well. And so now I'm just waiting for that Gorilla Glue to cure. But crazy, you never have enough clamps until you don't have enough clamps. And for this one, so far, so good. Okay, I've put what's essentially a beautiful 9-inch shelf right now. I've got it sitting on its brackets back into position with the plywood on top. Everything's been smoothed. I did run to the hardware store and I grabbed some wood stock. I grabbed a piece of angle stock, okay, and a piece of cove stock. And to my surprise, this cove stock can be as high as about $2.80 a foot. We've got 11.5 feet here. So it was some expensive trim, but what it did is it reinforced. I glued it underneath here, next to the metal stud and underneath, giving more of a brace to the plywood. And if you really think about it, and if I had done it on both sides, it's exactly the way they build concrete highway bridges, which this would actually make a really cool viaduct if it was painted gray with arch legs on it, but that's not for this project. Okay, so I also took the angle stock and I glued it underneath the plywood for the full length of the run up to where the radius is going to start. So you can see that right there glued on. Again, this is going to give me a lot of bracing underneath here. And this is good. I glued it with the water polyurethane Gorilla Glue. So that's going to keep everything from warping and keep it all straight. Now, before I stain that, I want to get the rest of the wood cut. So we're coming onto the part that's going to go into this curve here. And I double checked my radii, my radius plans for this curve. Checked and double checked, because when I cut this beautiful 3/4 inch piece of plywood that we're going to cut for this area, I want it to be right. I don't want any mistakes. The plywood was $100. There's no room for mistakes. So I'm coming in on the inside at a 55-degree radius. And the outside radius is going to be about 64 inches. And I went ahead and added a couple of more inches for the outside edge for space. That's going to be plenty of room for 4 tracks to come into this module right here. I've lined up some switches, the turnouts that I'm going to use. They need to be repaired because they've been used before. But they line up perfectly to where these tracks are going to intersect off the curve. Every one of them. So what I'm probably going to do is, after I repair these switches, I'm going to go ahead and solder this whole stack of switches together. So it'll be one long, stiff group of switches. You've seen me do this with the N scale layout, and I've done it with a lot of narrow gauge projects that we've worked on. It makes the switches stiff, like stained glass. So you can actually navigate and move the whole thing so that the straightaways exactly match up where I want them to. I don't want any errors on this. Now, we're going to go over into the shop, and I'm going to show you the piece of plywood which I've laid out. I've got all the radii drawn out on it. What I did was I took a tripod, one of my photography tripods, and it just so happens that a Milwaukee tape fits right on top of it, actually quite well. And I've got my radii drawn out. The radius is all drawn out here onto the plywood. And yeah, I don't know if you can see these lines or not. They're very faint. They're all done with a pencil, but I can see them with the jigsaw. Okay. I've even drawn where the stack is, the plumbing stack. And I mean, it's just gonna be perfect. Everything's gonna just come up perfect. On the edges of the wall, it's gonna curve out just a little bit to fill the voids. There'll be plenty of room to stand back here in the corner, and this is gonna be a beautiful curved piece of wood right here. The other thing I'm working on is the approach off of this module right here that you've seen me build, where it's gonna go off onto our shelf over there, okay? I can also get that out of the same piece of plywood. And I've actually got it laid right here on top of the wood. I'm tracing the actual dimensions of what it is. I'm adding 2 inches to the back side. That's the area where the main line on the old layout used to go either up or down along the wall to change levels. So I'm filling in that 2 inches on the back side. And I need this curve to curve around so that that end over there is about 8 inches wide. So just a couple hand-drawn French curves probably at this point. And by the way, all the measurements on this piece and the way it's going to be curved into a 9-inch wide section still clears the washer, deck, lid, which is super important. I was actually prepared to move the washer and dryer up 2 inches further, but as it is, I probably won't have to do that. I've got it right on the edge, but I have the option available to extend that flat platform of cement further 2 inches in the event that some of this curvature and this additional depth on the wall that we're doing would interfere with that piece of equipment. So at this point, this is nothing but jigsaw work. So I'm going to cut out the square where our 9-inch shelf is going to intersect with our curve and just literally start cutting with the jigsaw and lay it on the tabletop, and then we'll pick up the video again. At that point, we'll check out a test fit, and for both pieces, in fact. Once everything fits, then we'll start staining and polyurethaning this wood and getting it ready to put track on top of. new piece should fit. I don't like doing things live. And, well, I tell you what, she fits. That's perfect. In fact, I could take off a 1/16 of an inch, and I probably will. But I want everything to be final fit before I stain it, and this is perfect. This is absolutely nice. Look at that. This is gonna just come right there, and the washer lid clears. Yes. Okay. It should fit. Okay, I put the piece of plywood, freshly cut, in place here. And it is fitting perfectly. This diorama is going to get cut down. As you can see here, there's a difference. The top foam hangs over. So I'm going to trim that down, and that'll make this just right with a very small, either 1/16 or a 1/8 inch gap between the foam and the plywood. So that's perfect. On the other side, where it comes in with the shelf, I'm clearing the stack perfectly. I mean, I'm just barely touching that stack. So I'm probably going to take off, draw an arc and take off just a little bit to allow room for a little small plywood edge here that's going to guard the trains from falling off. So I need just a little more space there, but at least it fits. Because of the unevenness of the wall itself, and there's not anything I can do about that. I mean, I'm dealing with probably a 1/4 of an inch off edge all the way up the wall. And that's okay. I'm working around it. And in this instant, the cut that I made here doesn't fit. So what I'm going to do is take a pencil, and I'm going to trace underneath the module right here. In fact, I got a pencil right here. Let's do this right now. I'm going to trace. See that? So I'm going to strike a line right here. And one over here. And I'm going to need both hands to do this. So I need to put down the camera to actually draw this line. And then we're going to take it to the shop, do a final cut, and then put in another one of these brackets. I made space for the bracket to fit right here. There's not a stud here, but I do have a stud right here, so I'm going to come off with a piece of plywood and make an overall brace. I don't feel like using wall anchors that sink into the wall. Same thing over here. I've got a stud right here, and I've designed the scene so that the brace will go right here and come across. That will give support to this entire structure. It shouldn't warp. If it does in the future, I will put another brace underneath it, probably a small piece of steel 1/2 inch angle iron, and I'll screw it in from underneath, and that'll keep that from ever warping, but it shouldn't warp. I've had good luck with 3/4 inch plywood. All right, so final cutting now, and let's get some track laid, because that's the next part. There's gonna be a lot of staining. It's probably gonna take 48 hours, 2 days for the stain and 3 coats of polyurethane to dry on this and to put an edge on it. anchor it in place, and then we'll get busy starting to lay some track. So the last thing I want to do before I start staining all the woodwork, I want to add an edge, kind of like a fence, to the edges of the plywood. So here I've got what represents the plywood right here. And I cut a piece that's about 1.25 inches wide on the bandsaw. And what this is, this material, this thin material I'm using, is really what they use to laminate cabinets. And you can get this material at the hardware store in the cabinet section in sheets. And so I've run a sheet through the bandsaw. I've got long strips. And the plan is to attach it simply with a stapler to the outside edge, and then come back and fill the staple holes with some wood putty. And it'll give me a nice edge right there on both sides of this, so that in the event of a catastrophe, none of the trains are going to escape. Also, additionally, on part of this, there's a very relatively sharp curve here, probably close to an 18-inch radius. And so the wood, I've wet the wood in the sink here on that portion where I'm going to bend it around, and I'm going to use 1/2-inch crown staples in the gun. I'm probably showing you B-roll of me doing it. And this should be pretty quick. And then at that point, I'm ready to stain everything. I've spent the last 12 hours. I only had to use a few shims here and there. I've added brackets underneath. Everything's supported now. And any additional shims, which has been very little up to this point because everything's been fitting quite well. I put some ovals in this so I can vacuum behind it so no dirt will get behind or spiders can get in there. I can clean that easily. And everything is relatively level. The foam is more off. The plywood is exact, but the foam has got offages and dips and different things. I've got an 8-foot, actually a 6-foot level on this right now. And so just by having that in place, I can see where the level's not touching the foam. So this is not perfect, smooth, but it'll suffice for the track work. All of the woodwork is now relatively completed. Everything has been cut and positioned and is ready to be stained. Even the corner here, I cut a piece of wood for that, which is a simple triangle. And that's going to fit into position where the radius will start coming into the corner. And that's going to fit in here just like this. And I'm not going to put these pieces into place until they're stained. And then I'll screw and attach all of this and then put the edge on this portion as well as I build it. So at this point, everything is ready to go into the shop and be stained as soon as I put these edges on. So after working in the shop for about 36 hours, I've got all 4 pieces that we've built to create this new section of layout. They've all been stained with red oak stain to match the cabinetry of the studio down here. And I put 3 coats of high gloss Minwax polyurethane on all these pieces. They just really came out beautiful. I mean, it's just the most beautiful shelf. One trick when you're doing 2 sides of a piece like this, and you need to be able to flip it over to do the other side, put a couple of boards out and put some screws in there. That makes a minimal contact surface for the polyurethane wood so you don't get any marks. There's no marks for the screw heads that you can see on this board. And that allows you to set it right down, do both sides, and get good airflow underneath and on top. I've done that to all of the pieces. The great big 11-foot piece has got simply 4 screws holding it up like stilts. All the pieces have been done on the top, on the bottom. The sides are completed. There's one last piece of side that's going to be put into place. I'm going to drop in this triangular piece. And that piece has also been pre-treated, and I've got it hanging here from the heat vent. That's this piece right here. So as soon as I simply lay these pieces into place, put their shims back, there's only 3 shims because everything sets relatively perfectly on all of the adjustments. I'm going to turn around here and show you what I've done to the area over here. In the last 36 hours, I simply painted some clouds on the wall with a can of aerosol spray paint, and I feathered the white into the blue instead of having a straight line across there. All of that's going to be irrelevant after we put in the shelves for holding the scenery materials. This is the piece that simply holds the wooden shelf portion into place on the brackets here. And there's holes in this so that I can get a vacuum in there and clean the probably 1-inch space that's going to be inside of there, where the plywood's going to hang over the top and adjoin with the module. So before, I've got the module out right now because I also cleaned that table off. But before we can put the module back in and start letting track, I've got to put on this end a piece of plywood. I usually wrap my dioramas in oak, and I need a piece of plywood on the end to finish off the end so this foam won't be exposed. And it'll also give, then I'll have the exact spacing of the width of the plywood, carve the module down, and then put it in place. I'll know how wide of a gap that the track rail joiners are going to have to span. So at this point, all I have to do is simply put all of the pieces back into place, tighten them all up, put them in, and then we're going to start laying track. So first I put in the 11-foot long metal stud with all the beautiful wood on the shelf brackets about where it was going to go. And its exact location will be dictated by this next piece, which, let me tell you, it just smells so wonderful when a project like this is going together. This piece too did fit into place just perfectly, and the wooden guardrails on the side matched up just right. So far so good. I'm really pleased with the way this woodwork is turning out. Now it was time to put in the very beautiful curved 3/4 inch piece of plywood with 3 coats of polyurethane and that Minwax red oak stain. It too has guardrails on the inside and the outside, and it sets right atop the shelf brackets. I didn't need to do very much shimming at all, and what little I did was just perfect compensation for everything to line up. I was pretty satisfied with the way this corner was turning out. So I wanted to test fit in the module one last time. In an upcoming episode where we continue construction, we're going to build the wooden end for that module. That cart is magnificent for helping me, by myself, put a module into place, or take one into the shop and work on it. The whole system works beautifully.
There's going to be a lot of work ahead, painting the top of that module dark, for example, just to give it a coat to seal it and kill that bright pink color. But yeah, this thing fits in there just right. So this is the way the final finish looks. It looks so nice, it doesn't even need to have track on it. Everything matches up. All of the joints are smooth and level. I may put some different lighting on there, but the puck lights for now look just fine. I did build some shelves underneath, like I said I was planning on doing, to hold the scenery products. Look how this all lines up. It's so nice. So now what we'll do is in the next episode of What's Neat, we'll continue finishing the foam module and then finally get some track laid atop of this, because it's been about 3 months since I've seen a train actually run. But it looks fantastic, ready, set, go. That's this segment for What's Neat. All of the products seen on this episode of What's Neat are available from Lombard Hobbies in Lombard, Illinois, or order online at lombardhobby.com. And by Broadway Limited Imports, the cutting-edge leader in model trains. Check out their website at broadway-limited.com. Bachman Trains. Now that's the way to run a railroad. Check out their website at bachmantrains.com.